Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in what I think is probably the 493rd Plan S open access session. I appreciate you hanging in with the topic all the way to Friday. So Plan S has generated virtual reams of commentary, but almost all of it, from the policy statement itself to the defenses of it and the objections to it, tend to treat humanities and the qualitative social sciences as an afterthought. It's a virtual and almost a literal footnote. You get to that second to the last paragraph, and there's some hand waving around. We understand there are disciplinary differences, and we'll have to figure those out. And then full speed ahead. So we are here today with this particular panel to unpack that brief aside in the second to last paragraph a little bit and explore the implications of not only Plan S, but a lot of policies and mandates that share many similar characteristics, and also the transformative agreements that are emerging, and any other models that might be workable in the humanities and social sciences that we come upon. So that is what we're here to do today. And I want to introduce myself. I'm Allison Beelan, and I'm with Duke University Press, where I'm the Director for Digital Strategy and Systems. And on our panel today, we have two folks from the library world and two folks from the publishing world. My colleague, Rob Dilworth, is the Journals Director at Duke University Press. They publish 56 journals in the humanities, social sciences, and math. The University Press is a department of the university and a nonprofit, and our subscription revenues support our mission, which is another way of saying we have things that don't cover their costs, and then we have things that do, and it all balances out. Lisa Janicki Hinchliffe is a professor and librarian at the University of Illinois Urbana, where she has her career has spanned 30 years in academic libraries, and she's also an academic author and an editor. So she's got feet in many parts of the world. An editor of Library Trends, as well as a chef at the Scholarly Kitchen, who has kind of developed a niche in explaining all of these mandates, policies, and agreements that are raining down upon us quickly. Also on our panel is Emily Poznanski, the Director of Strategy with De Gruyter. De Gruyter has around 500 open access journals and subscription journals. They are a venerable publisher, 270 years, and they are actively seeking to support the transformation to open access. Finally, we have Matt Wilmot, the OA collection strategist with the California Digital Library, and CDL oversees the shared library collections on behalf of the 10 University of California campuses, which obviously produce a tremendous amount of research. And he develops the strategy and analysis for transformative OA agreements that they are seeking to negotiate. And then again, I am Allison. So I just want to lay out some scope for this discussion. We will be focusing pretty laser sharp on the humanities and social sciences. So a lot of what we talk about is going to have context in the sciences, but we're going to try to stay in that zone. There's a really complex, interesting conversation to be had about OA book monographs, and that tends to be what is in that second to last paragraph aside. But we're focusing on journals in this case, in the humanities and social sciences. We're also going to focus on subscription-based journals and the strategies that seek to flip them to OA, as opposed to diving into the creation of sort of born open access journals. And I just want to quickly recognize who's not on the panel. We don't have, for instance, an independent society publisher, and some of them have been really wonderful advocates for their disciplines, but we only had an hour, so we don't have everybody up here. We don't have any fully OA publishers on the panel. Our librarians come from major research institutions, so we don't have representation from smaller liberal arts colleges or community colleges. And other than Lisa, who is an editor of a journal, we don't have scholars and editors' voices centered on this panel. So I just kind of wanted to recognize our restrictions. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but I just want to ground everyone in some of the terminology we may use. So there's no standard terminology for all of these colors or flavors of open access, but we do have to talk to each other today, and we need to do a landscape overview. So we do need to just put some stakes into the ground. Do not take these definitions as gospel. Even amongst our panel, as we were deciding what language to use, we could not come to a full agreement and just eventually chose one. But we do want to recognize and point out that when talking about open access, it's important to look at, you've got article level OA, like is this article open access? And then you have journal level OA. And I think probably in our discussion today, if we talk about this at all, we're going to end up talking a lot about article level OA in what we're calling gold. So this is where someone is paying for that article fees to publish it. We may talk about green a little bit, where say author accepted manuscripts are being deposited into repositories. And then on the journal level OA, I'm sure we will be talking about hybrid journals a lot. And then gold journals, which we're defining, again, just for today, as fully OA, but funded by APC's article processing charges. And then we're using the phrase platinum for a journal that funds itself and its open access through some means other than article processing charges. So, again, be careful with this. Okay. So, Lisa was kind enough to sort of chart out the various open access levers and catalysts that have been around, and that a variety of stakeholders in the research community have developed over the years. So I think we're, in maybe year 15 or 20 of this really evolving landscape. But with the relatively recent introduction of Plan S in 2018, as well as the varieties of transformative agreements between library consortia and publishers that are coming out that are intended to be accelerators of a full transition to open access, all of this is kind of coming together around those and has been a real center of discussion and controversy. So all of this is at play. Some of it's been at play for a long time, but today we're going to look specifically at the ways Plan S and transformative agreements do, and mostly do not, address the humanities and social science disciplines, either the scholarly process or the scholarly publishing, and how could they be made to do so. So to start us off, so what we're going to do is have a little bit of a facilitated question and answer, and try to have a discussion around these topics, and then hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes for your questions. So I'm going to kick us off. So Lisa, what's Plan S, and what are transformative agreements, and how do they address or impact humanities and social science publishing?
So I feel like I was in this very room yesterday for the session that was about Plan S, and they had the advantage of basically hedging with everything and say, well, we don't know the final guidelines yet. So now we have the, quote, final guidelines, and I, along with other people, have sort of very desperately been trying to read and unpack and also see what's different and the same from the draft guidelines. So I think it's worth doing a very quick overview to say that Plan S, as a coalition of funders, is articulating guidelines which are actually guidelines for them, those funders. So like we impose upon ourselves a set of guidelines about how we will then impose requirements on those who receive our funding. So one of the sort of interesting things we still have going on is, even now having received the final guidelines, or let me say the Twitter community has already identified a number of things that are still very, very unclear. We still don't know how these will emerge and be documented and play out within each of the funding agencies. And one thing that the final guidelines make very clear is that each funding agency will be making its own document as they move to implement this. So in case you're thinking, well, that's going to be interesting, I think it is. But most fundamental, Plan S sort of brought to the fore the notion of three sort of pathways, or three routes, as they call it, to being compliant. So a funder would be either supporting a scholar to publish in a full, what we are here calling gold or platinum open access journal, or on an open access platform, which we are by and large going to set aside today as an example, with some additional restrictions on what those would be. One of the things for the humanities and social sciences that has emerged is, although CC/BY will be preferable, there is an expectation that each funder will provide a mechanism for grantees to request to have a CC/BY ND on their articles. We do not have any indications yet of how easily it will be to get that kind of, exemption, if you will. So as we were talking before, will it be done at the granting stage where the grantee just says, and I'd like this exemption, or will it be done one by one at the publishing stage and an expectation for the publisher to facilitate that? I know where I think it should be done for easy sake, but there are many things about Plan S that I don't think are about prioritizing ease. So we have yet to see. Another, they did maintain and clarify the the repository route, where the compliance comes from the repositing, not from the publication. Although the publication agreement has to allow the kind of repositorying that is required. Perhaps the most significant component of this is that the version of record or author-accepted manuscript must be immediately non-embargoed available under the appropriate CC license in an openly available repository. So the removal of any possibility of embargoes as that kind of mechanism. Then finally, I should also say, in such cases, an author may still choose to publish in a hybrid journal and pay an APC, but the funders have declared in this set of guidelines that they will not support the payment of that APC. So in a gold OA journal that has an APC, the funders, it says they will financially support the publication fees. Under the repository model, the funder does not provide any financial support and specifically says, and we will not pay an APC. So that's another no hybrid kind of thing. The third route is under some sort of transformative arrangement. So in the first guidelines, we had transformative agreements as a single category. We now have transformative arrangements, two of which are described in more detail than the third, but only one of which is actually articulated as transformative agreements that comply with the EASC or ESAC, I can never get that acronym right, principles, which is the OA 2020 Max Planck hosted set of principles. There are two other routes. One is the idea of a model transformative agreement for small society publishers and smaller publishers, which they will work to develop. So we don't know what that would be. And the final is there is a nod to Springer Nature's idea of a transformative journal, and they say they are open to developing a framework for what that might be.
And Lisa, could you just very quickly give a definition of transformative agreement and what these are looking like?
So transformative agreement has sort of consensus-wise, although there's consensus isn't unanimity. The notion a transformative agreement shifts in some way the library spend from subscription to publishing. And we have sort of those two flavors that keep getting bandied about: read and publish and read. Those have implementation implications for how they might play out, say, within a library consortia. But most fundamentally, they both shift from paying to read to paying to publish, with the idea of eventually a transformative agreement should no longer be possible, in the sense that eventually you would be fully shifted to paying for publishing. So I don't know if I've managed as quickly as I was supposed to, but it is like a 10-page document. So
Yeah.
And there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of footnotes on all of what I just said.
It came out on the eve of our presentation.
4:01 yesterday, in case you're wondering.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll have an opportunity through the discussion to unpack, read and publish and read a little bit. But definitely, if you have questions about that, bring them up later. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So, Rob, can you talk about what Duke University Press's approach to OA publishing has been? And specifically, do the requirements in these emerging mandates and levers pose particular challenges for H&SS scholarly publishing and culture?
I was going to start by just providing a few financial facts about Duke University Press to provide some context. So first, Duke University provides the press with a subsidy each year that's about 3% of our operating budget. And so the press really needs to cover the rest of the budget via revenues. So we really don't have a benefactor. We really have to make our finances work. Over time, the press basically operates at net financial zero. So some years we have a small deficit. Some years we have a small surplus, financial surplus. And in the years when we have the financial surplus, we put that money in a reserve fund and we use it later for infrastructure or to cover future years where we have a deficit. And we publish 56 journals. About a third of those journals operate at a net financial loss each year. So it's the subscription-based journals that generate a surplus that cover the third that don't. And the reason that third doesn't make a profit, there's a few reasons, but a couple are, one, it takes a long time for a journal to generate enough revenues to cover its expenses. It can usually take 5 to 10 years. And then we have a handful of journals that we subsidize just because we believe in them and think they're intellectually viable and important. In terms of open access, we have offered authors the option of making their articles OA. The revenue that we receive from that is microscopic, basically. I think we, on average, get less than $5,000 a year from hybrid OA income. Besides that, we have 2 platinum open access journals. So one we've published for a few years, and that has 5 institutional funders who have agreed to a certain amount of money that they'll provide for a 5-year period. That journal has operated at a slight net loss since we started publishing it. And then next month we're going to start publishing another journal that will also be platinum OA, and its funding is from a grant. But over the next few years, we want to try to migrate that to having 5+ institutional funders support it, because we view that as more stable funding. So basically, the path that we've been on is to try to publish more open access journals, but to do so as part of a portfolio of journals that includes subscription-based journals that generate a surplus, so that they can support the open access journals, basically. And
yeah, so and how do you see these mandates and levers? What are the particular challenges given that context?
Yeah, I think for us, there's probably a lot, but just to name a few, The big daddy of all of them is the fact that really in the humanities and social sciences, there's not significant money to pay for gold APCs. If there were, how I think about all of this would be probably very different. For us also, for a publisher of our size, I think other challenges with some of the mandates are, one is with metadata. And the collection of metadata and making sure that it's accurate to, say, collect like what country an author is from. Right now, only 40% of our journals are on an online peer review system. And I think to really get this metadata, we'd have to have them all on it. And basically, that's just a financial issue for us. We'll probably work to do that, but it would be expensive. And also, most of our humanities authors do not have ORCIDs, so that's another issue that's related to metadata. Another big one is just Plan S's requirement on an XML, having the journals in XML. Right now, 2/3 of our journals are in XML and are published in HTML and in PDF format. But we still have a third to go. And basically the reason they're not all in HTML right now is just financial again, it's about workload, about finances, and we're just trying to incrementally do that, but that's something we would have to step up.
Good news. The guideline says that's now strongly recommended rather than required.
Thank you. I retract my objection.
Right. Full speed
still
ahead.
Strongly recommended.
Yeah, I mean, Emily, do you have anything to add on what you see as particular challenges when these are applied to the humanities?
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me okay at the back?
Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, the challenges we had were similar in terms of infrastructure to support these agreements. We have a lot of submission paths with our humanities journals, and capturing that was and still is a challenge. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Emily, back to you. So the DeGruyter Journal List contains significant humanities and social science content. You do have STM. I think you said in a conversation it was about 50-50. And DeGruyter has entered into several transformative agreements. Can you describe broadly what these transformative agreements have looked like, and specifically, you are pursuing them and you're hoping to pursue them at scale? Will they sustain your publishing operation?
Yeah. So, I mean, at DeGruyter, we see transformative deals as one way to move to open access. And we've signed a few of these deals, mostly in Europe. So with some of the sort of obvious players like the UK, the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, but also with less sort of prominent OA countries like Slovenia, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Italy. And all of these are on a consortia level. So we try to include all our journals.
And are they national consortia?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. In the US, we are approaching it slightly differently, where we have an institutional offer, and we're just starting to roll that out now. Hopefully, it will get some traction and support here. So, I mean, as a strategy, we want to scale this up. Our entire sales force is now including open access in every deal. The requirements vary a lot according to what the funder or the consortia needs. So there is quite a lot of complexity there. But it is a positive mechanism. I mean, the impact is immediate for our authors. We remove the APC barrier from day one when we sign a deal like that. So that is a positive development. And for the institutions that we partner with, we do promise to reduce subscription prices according to OA content, to the level of open access content published. So those are both sort of ways to move to open access. But the question of sustainability is, I mean, the easy answer is it's not sustainable because these are transformative deals, and that's how we see them. So it's a sort of means to an end. They won't stick around forever, as Plan S strongly states. These are temporary measures. So for us, what we're actively exploring is other mechanisms to support humanities journals. We've launched H&SS open access journals, and their APCs just don't work. They really don't, as was mentioned. So we're having to be a little bit more creative in that sphere, trying out different models and seeing if that is a more sustainable path for that bit of the portfolio anyway.
Could you offer examples of a couple of those different models?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the subscribe to open model. We were trying it out at De Gruyter a few years ago. We didn't get the support from librarians then, actually, but we're coming back to it. I think a lot of talk actually about this model is great because it will get better support from librarians, hopefully. But that's just one mechanism. We're looking at our sort of more national journals and looking at different types of funding within Germany specifically for our sort of local language journals. And what else? I mean, I think another model, it's a lot of institutional consortial funding that we're testing out for the humanities. So to remove the APC, essentially.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any thoughts around that?
I wanted to kind of toss a question to you, and I don't know if this puts you on the spot a little bit, but I'm curious. You're trying all these sort of innovative efforts to move individual journals or individual subscribers towards open access. What do you see as sort of the end point for De Gruyter in particular? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like De Gruyter is moving towards becoming a full open access publisher, or is it sort of going to be patchwork, and some things will move there and some things will be permanently subscription, or what's the kind of end point of all this?
I mean, for me, it's not really, and for De Gruyter, I can say, I mean, the question of whether we will expect to find articles online free to read in the future without access barriers is a bit of a no-brainer. I mean, we see that being the future. Whether that is APC driven alone, I would question. So that's why we're exploring a lot of different things. The complexity that we have right now makes me think that we do need to simplify things a little bit. And APCs are one simplification, but we see that it doesn't work for all our disciplines. So, yeah, I mean, the strategy right now is a diversity of models and seeing what sticks. But the question of, will articles be online, free to read? Definitely yes. And I would say that for all our content. And humanities shouldn't be left behind. I mean, that's an important point.
So I think one thing for, I'm going to speak specifically, I think, to the librarians in the room primarily, though I think also, for all of us to think about is one interesting thing that I think becomes much more obvious in this final version of the Plan S guidelines is that transformative agreements keep the burden of paying for open access on libraries. Because under the 3 routes to open access in Plan S, for paying for the APC in a gold open access journal, it says Coalition S funders will financially support. For the repository option, it says they will not support the APC. For the payment of a transformative agreement, it says funders can contribute, not will. So what that means is a library would enter, or an institution or consortium would enter into a transformative agreement without any sort of commitment from at least this set of funders to contribute to that transformative agreement's funding. And so a transformative agreement, the way it's laid out now, is going to require that the institution or consortium, at a minimum, have the ability to fund that transformative agreement. Now, I can imagine some mechanisms and levers for bringing in some of that funding, but the Coalition S funders do not say to themselves, we will fund transformative agreements. And they explicitly say that they will not, even if they have, they will cease such funding on December 31st, 2024. So I think for those of us in the room who are either dependent on the income from a transformative agreement or are trying to figure out what are the funding sources for a transformative agreement, I might be teeing up Matt here a little bit. I think we need to sort of pay close attention to the will not, and might statements of these three routes.
Wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't wrangled with that. So Matt.
Speaking of Matt.
So the California Digital Library and the UC system has laid out a strategy designed to transform more content to open access through negotiating transformative agreements with publishers. So can you describe CDL's general approach briefly? But what I'm really interested in is your approach to that strategy different for H&SS than it is for STM?
Sure. Yeah. So really, the strategy we're taking is negotiating for these types of transformative agreements, like what Lisa is talking about, where the agreement is there to govern both payment for access to content, as well as payments made for open access publication of our authors' content. And we are strongly negotiating to have the majority of payment be for publication and not for access, and to even have that payment for access decreasing over time, because that's really the transition that we're trying to create. One of the things that we are working to incorporate into these agreements is some level of cost neutrality between the subscription model and this transformative agreement model. The idea being that there's a lot of concern about models that start relying on APCs or on any sort of per article payments. And we don't really want to put undue risk on either the publisher or the institution of wild swings in revenue or payment that could really break this agreement, right? So what we're trying to do is create that sort of space so that we can develop the right workflows and infrastructure and financial flows to make these types of agreements work without really putting undue stress on either the publisher or the institution. Once we feel like we're in a place that we can do so, then we anticipate sort of taking off the training wheels and letting our investment sort of follow our authors' publishing decisions. One of the key pieces of the models that we're negotiating for, and this gets to what everybody here has been talking about so far, is that we're actually interested in involving the author in the payment process, while still offering them significant amounts of support, particularly if they don't have research funding available. So what we're doing is we're negotiating discounted APCs for our authors for the articles that they publish in publishers that we're working with. And then on top of that discount, we're paying a subvention on every article that is published. And it's fairly substantial. It's on the order of 50% of the discounted APC we'll pay out of the library's funds. Then we go to the author and we ask them to pay the remainder of that APC if they have a grant available. If they don't have a grant available, then we pay the remainder of the APC on their behalf. So in that way, we're working to incorporate these other funding streams like Lisa was talking about, but we're not putting that excess pressure on authors that don't have those other funding streams to contribute, which I think gets at what Rob and Emily are talking about, concerns around the APC model. And then, of course, authors are able to opt out of publishing open access if they want to, because we really need to leave that author choice in there. So if they don't want to even participate, even if we're footing the bill, they're welcome to do that, and they can publish behind a paywall. And so the exciting thing is that we have an agreement in place now that we're working on implementing with Cambridge University Press. We signed a memorandum of understanding with them in April. And so right now we're working on all of the very intricate details of implementation, which is a huge can of worms, and also on sorting out license language, because there's not really a license that hashes all of this out just yet. But one of the things that I'm particularly excited about with this deal is that Cambridge covers a wide range of subjects, including both STM and humanities and social sciences. And so it really offers authors the opportunity to engage with open access where they might not have been able to otherwise, while offering them that significant level of support.
So Matt, what about a publisher not of the scale of Cambridge University Press, which
Sure.
I think is by number, the majority of humanities and social science publishers?
Yeah. Certainly we have sort of sets of criteria that we're thinking about when figuring out which publishers to try to work with. One of them involves impact overall and the size of the publisher. And so Cambridge was an appealing choice because they're a fairly large university press, so they're mission-based. They have that wide range of subjects. But I do think that one of the opportunities that piloting with publishers of the size of Cambridge offers is that then we can, both we being from a large public university system and Cambridge being a fairly large publisher, we have the capacity to sort out a lot of these workflow questions. And then that can be transitioned to other agreements with other publishers or smaller publishers, right? One of the things that we're working on is infrastructure. Cambridge partners with the Copyright Clearance Center. I don't know if you all were in the plenary presentation a minute ago, but there was a presentation about their RightsLink platform. That's what Cambridge uses for their APC collection. And so we're developing, we're working with Cambridge and with CCC to sort of develop the infrastructure to support this model. And then once CCC has that infrastructure, then it can be implemented elsewhere. So it really makes the work that we do here transferable to other publishers that might not have the capacity to go through this whole process and figure out all of the infrastructure questions and all of the minutia, right? So I feel like we're really piloting things so that those smaller publishers then maybe have an easier road in the future. And I will just mention that CCC is not necessarily the only option for that. There's been talk out there of open shared infrastructure for this sort of thing. So we would be interested in exploring that. We're not actively exploring it right now, but I think that would also make these types of workflows transferable to other publishers. And I think that's really important. We're certainly not thinking, okay, we'll work with the big publishers and then forget everybody else, right? We want to build something that can be transferable across the whole system.
So after this, I'll figure out where on that pecking order Duke is. I need a timeline. Thank you very much for that. So this is just a general question to the whole panel. I'd really like everyone to have a chance to respond to it. And we've got just about 6 or 7 minutes before I want to go to audience Q&A. So hopefully we can protect that time. So the question is, what do you think are the most viable models for sustaining H&SS scholarly publishing?
I will try to take that. I do not have the answer. If I had the answer, I would be a very rich man.
Wait, this is Humanities.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
I'd be a moderately well-off middle-class man.
It's a really hard thing to answer. I think it's interesting where Emily's saying she definitely sees the future where there'll be the need for everything to be open. Maybe if I was based in Europe, I would think that. I just have to be honest, from my vantage point, I don't necessarily see that yet. So I really do see, for who I am and the position I'm in and the details that I see, I really see that there can be more open access publishing, and we can move to that and have, more openness. But it's hard for me to see it without subscription-based publishing as a big part of the mix. I really do like our platinum OA journals with the institutional funding. I think that's a good model.
And just to be clear, this institutional funding is not libraries.
No, it's actually, for the one journal where you have the institutional funding, it's different centers at different universities. But I think that's a good model, and if we could build that model and actually mean that we could generate a surplus for a journal, then I think it would be great, because that would help the whole system. But
I can try to go next. I think really I envision it being sort of a mix of different models that work appropriately for the community being served, right? I can talk at great length about these transformative agreements that we're working on, which we see as a viable way to shift legacy subscription publishers towards open access. And that's really one of our main goals, and we're getting a lot of push from our faculty even to work on that. But that's not to say that's the only model that exists. I think there are certainly different communities that have different needs and that would be served well by different models. And we see that developing now. There was a meeting about Libraria about a month ago that came out with I think it's Library Plus Funders model that they're working to implement. There's Subscribe to Open that Emily mentioned, right, that I think has a lot of promise in certain communities and in communities where it can be widely implemented. Similar to that is like the Scope 3 model in particle physics. That's sort of a collaborative funding model that can be transferred to other communities. Certainly in humanities and social sciences, I could see that being an effective model. And so I really think it's going to depend on the community being served and how best the model can work for them. But I think it's important to keep exploring these different things. And so I like what Emily's talking about doing, and that they're kind of trying these different things, and hopefully that'll help us figure out what those future models are.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I completely agree. One point about the transformative agreements that I think is beneficial to the humanities is that it's sort of picking up OA, it's sort of increasing OA publishing in the humanities. So just developing that behavior is a positive thing. And then, supporting sort of subject-based approaches is something that we're looking at De Gruyter. So looking at the linguistics community and talking to our editors and seeing, what they want. And I think we will see that kind of fragmentation in the humanities, especially when we're developing these models.
So I think one of the thing I start to think about is sort of which models work for which parts of the sector. So I would like to talk about not-for-profit humanities publishers for a moment and the possibilities they might have, which is ultimately, I think when you think about all of these kinds of agreements, they work at scale and they don't sort of like sometimes we think about like trying things small and then scaling them. Things like transformative agreements almost have built into them the idea that they have to be big to even be tried, because you're looking at ways of sort of by breadth and depth being able to sort of distribute risk and distribute cost in order to distribute benefit. So in the not-for-profit part of this, I have started to wonder if there is an opportunity for the kind of consortium that libraries have developed, if you will, as purchasers of content, right, where we have come together. Is there a parallel that we might see happen on the publishing side that says, is there a way that we can sort of have a shared offering that sort of builds the scale on the other side, if you will? Now, the commercial sector, the for-profit sector, I mean, there's still going to be issues on the not-for-profit, but this immediately becomes highly problematic on the profit side, for-profit side, because of antitrust and, collusion, those sorts of legal frameworks that are going to definitely come into play if you're on the commercial for-profit side of things. But I think I think particularly the other thing I really loved, and I actually didn't notice this till today, Allison, but brilliant, is that you asked us actually about scholarly publishing, not scholarly journals in this last one. And I'm sort of starting to wonder if we also will see actually, there's a lot of discussion about the journal as sort of the reified object, the article as the reified object. And many people in science trying to actually say, why are we doing this? I actually think the innovation in this area has always been, and the diversity of what counts as an article versus a chapter versus an object. Like the humanities and qualitative social sciences have actually a much more diverse plethora of scholarly outputs, I think, if you look at them. And yet, so there might be opportunities, and I'm going to bring back something we set aside, is that it's possible, I think, that models for sustaining H&SS scholarly publishing might actually look more like platforms than collections of articles. and growing sort of digital projects that we saw certainly work in the digital humanities, for example. Now, where that leaves publishers and how you would, pivot to sort of be a platform provider, which is like a word phrase that just kind of makes me cringe because everything's a platform these days. But I think there's some interesting opportunities there if one is able to step away from the article. In certain cases, it might not work everywhere, but some other ideas that we haven't kind of talked about today that aren't sort of so much about like fiddling around with licenses.
So I'm wondering if I can get some help to get the microphone stand back. And then in the meantime, maybe take one of these. Martha, would you mind helping us? So we're open for questions. Does anybody want to start us off?
Middle, yes.
Yes, please.
I got it.
Thank you. Oh, come on.
Left.
Yes. Do you mind speaking into the microphone? It's being recorded. Or I can repeat the question if you want to ask it.
Please speak into the mic. It really helps everyone.
Do you want to come over to that?
Okay, this is not a plant because I also work for De Gruyter. But, I was just interested in the wider panel in the role of books or ISBNs in monetizing content. So I know you've expressed the journal side of things, but I think that content could be multi-populated. We shouldn't necessarily always compartmentalize. Is that clear to everyone? So the role of publishing content in one, it can come out as a journal, it can come out as a book. I'm not talking about dual publication necessarily. It's just about using the internet, yeah?
I won't answer because it's De Gruyter asking. But what the question was, why we excluded other types of content? That's the question.
Because we had an hour, and we just had to draw some boundaries, and it was impossible to talk about books and journals. And these plans and mandates are focused on the article and the APC model. So we wanted to unpack that a little bit.
Hi, I think this question is for Matthew from CDL. You said that you were getting a push from faculty to move legacy subscriptions to open access. And I want to know more about that. Are you getting pushed from humanities faculty? If so, are you discerning that around a particular subfield? Do you have statistics to back that up? Is this anecdotal? If you could tell us more about that, I'd be curious.
Yeah, so we've always sort of historically, University of California has been sort of on the forefront of thinking about open access. We have an open access policy. Really, in the last year or so, we've gotten several indicators from our faculty, 3 in particular that I can think of that have really driven our thinking in this. One is that 8 of our 10 campuses have signed on to the OA 2020 initiative or signed the expression of interest. And so that was a really big signal. And that came from the faculty, not from the library. And so that was a big signal that faculty across those campuses are interested in transitioning.
Including humanities faculty? So, I think the question is specifically,
the
like,
academic
are you getting...
senates include faculty from across.
Okay, so that's coming up in the academic senate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another one of those drivers is what was termed a Declaration of Rights and Principles to Transform Scholarly Communication that came from our faculty committee on the library system. That's made up, and I anticipated this question, so I checked before coming here, of the 12 faculty representatives, so 1 from each campus plus the chair and vice chair. 6 of them are in humanities or social sciences fields, 6 of them are in STM fields. And so that's really split. And these principles were really, some of them were fairly straightforward, no copyright transfers, things like that. But some of them were also very forward thinking. No new deals without OA offsets, no new paywalls for our work. So these were really items that are committing. The faculty committee is trying to commit us in the library to act on. And we really took that to heart when developing our strategies. And I see people lining up for questions, so I won't go too much further. But the other document is a call to action that came from our system-wide advisory committee. And that's also across the whole system. That's not all faculty, it's more administrators. But that also sort of guided us towards the idea of undertaking these sorts of negotiations in an effort to transition to open research in general and not specifically in science and technology.
Which comes concomitant with the campus also saying, and we will fund this,
Right.
right? So these are not the faculties who would be saying, and so, well, I don't have a grant, because you said we'll be funding this for you if you don't have a grant.
Yeah, that's how we're
I feel like
developing
this is a
it, yeah.
particularly sort of ecosystem effect a little bit myself, but.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, Emily Fowle from MIT Press. I guess related to what you're talking about, particularly, Lisa, as you brought up the idea that in humanities and social sciences there may be more potential for experimental models just beyond thinking about the article. And I can't help thinking about how that links back to tenure and promotion. And Matt, you talk about involving faculty. How do those pieces come together? Are sort of tenure and promotion committees considering how open access is weighted, and are these pieces being brought together in ways that you've seen?
We do have a few faculty on our campuses that are really interested in addressing that in their tenure and promotion processes. There's one faculty member in particular who made a commitment that he is chair of his department this year, and he's going to work those into the tenure and promotion process. And so that's in linguistics too, which is sort of I would say social science combined with some STM. And so that's really that's another area that we're starting to see sort of a groundswell from faculty, is that they are interested in building this into their tenure and promotion. That's a slow moving process, of course, and so it's not going to happen overnight.
Yes.
Hi, Claudette Wantland from the University of Illinois Press. This is for Emily when she was talking about her transformative agreements that she's been working on, and the complexity involved in each of those agreements. And one thing you mentioned was the reduction of the subscription rate according to the amount of OA content published. Can you just talk about that a little more? And like, how do you arrive at what that percentage is?
Yeah. So it's, to make it simple, we review the level of open access content in all of our journals at the end of the year. And when that reaches 5%, we'll reduce the subscription price accordingly. And we just have these levels. So 10%, again, we reduce the subscription price proportional to OA content. So that's our sort of commitment to transformation, if you like.
And in getting prepared for this panel, I ran across Brill's site, and they have a very clear statement about how they offset around balancing subscription price and OA amount, if you want to look that up.
Hi, Casey Lindley from Duke University Press. I also have a question for Emily. So you mentioned that you all tried the subscribe to open model, and I wondered if you would talk about that a little bit more and what happened with it, and then if the journals that were not able to convert, did you have to move those back to a subscription access wall, and what did that look like, and did it work?
Yeah, we didn't get to the point of opening the content because we didn't get the buy-in from libraries. So that was where we got stuck. It's possible we were a little bit too early with that. The journals were in library and information science, and so it made sense for us to move those to OA, and the community really wanted it. So we were sort of playing around with different ideas, and this was one. So it wasn't as good as the subscribe to open model. That's why it failed. But it was basically the same concept where we said to institutions, we said, stick to your subscription price. If you commit to that, we make the whole thing open. And there was a bit of wavering, and we just didn't get the buy-in. But I think the communication around this model is really important, and that's what's nice to hear during the course of this conference and others. It's really being talked about quite a lot, so I think it will get traction. And I mean, I don't know whether commercial publishers will pick it up much, because it does cap, obviously, revenues. But for non-for-profit publishers, I think it's a great model.
Rob, I'm curious, we were talking at breakfast a little bit about some questions around the subscribe to open model as Annual Reviews has done it, and just what it takes to be a journal or a publisher that could work for.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about it a lot. When I went to the session yesterday, I was super excited about it and thought it was really interesting and really smart. But I also think that, like, Annual Reviews is probably the perfect type of journals for it, because I think they're all, unless I'm mistaken, I think they're all direct subscriptions. So I think the issue for me with subscribe to open, it would be, for instance, at Duke, we provide direct subscriptions for all of our journals, but then we also have a collection, and all the journals are in the collection. So I don't know. Again, I think it's a super interesting model, but for some journals, for instance, I could see it really not working. Like, we have a number of journals that, I mean, any journal that was really started like in the last 15 years does not have a big institutional subscription base. And those journals have economic models that are dependent on collection revenue. So, like, we have a group of journals that probably really depend on Project Muse. So again, I thought it was super interesting for its, and really liked it because of its simplicity. But yeah, when I thought about it more deeply, it raised some questions.
All right. Okay, so my name is Phillips. I'm from McGill University. So I want to ask Matty from CDL. So when the issue of University of California canceling subscription with a severe boycott, so a lot of people were asking questions. And so a friend of mine who is a non-open access researcher was asking if it's possible for institutional repositories to actually help to achieve the mission of open access, if universities can start publishing and authors can start publishing their work in institutional repositories. So I have to tell him about, presently repositories serve as preservation and access, not basically about publishing. So I want to find out is, do any of you foresee a future where university presses, because it was interesting to know that you subscribed, where you had a deal with Cambridge University Press. So do you foresee a future of university presses like MIT Press and coming to an agreement to actually help fulfill open access much more than the other commercial publishers?
I could see that being possible, yeah. I think that there's probably a large portion of the librarian community in particular that is very interested in that sort of the idea of kind of the academy taking back scholarly publishing and leveraging university presses and institutional repositories to really handle all of the publishing operations.
With their university presses as part of the academy.
Yeah. I think that's part of, well,
because
I don't fully share that vision, if I'm being honest, and so I don't want to speak for people that do, but I believe that people see university presses as a part of that sort of vision of the institute or the academy taking back publishing and managing it from individual institutions, either through repositories or through university presses. And Lisa, you might know more than I on that, actually.
I agree with you that by and large people perceive university presses as being, when we say take back that, like the university presses are inside the group of people taking it back, which might seem odd since you might think, like, who am I taking it from? I have it, but like,
we haven't lost it.
You're on the right side, I guess is the way to say that. I think the other piece, though, that we should also not lose sight of, and it's a small growth area, but I think significant, particularly in the context of this particular panel focused on HSS, is that we are seeing a fairly rapid rise of library-based publishing programs. And I'm sure there's a report out there, so I'm just going to make an impressionistic statement, which is I do not see library presses spinning up scholarly STM journals. That is not where their effort is. By and large, their effort is very aligned with the digital humanities in most cases, and some social science areas, but very much in the humanities sides of things. So this is an interesting development in the sense that now maybe libraries with this activity are becoming competitors to like we're entering that space as publishers, and yet libraries. Much of that work is actually being subvented by institutions. I think university presses are somewhat perhaps frustrated with this, particularly when there is a library publishing activity at the same place with the press, and if there's not a good collaboration going on. But we might want to keep track of that particular area of activity, because that's one area of the take it back sort of model, and where take it back seems to mean also creating some of those kind of not just journal article and also very innovative sort of humanities objects, I guess is what I'll say, or content. So I think for me, it's less the institutional repository, which is by and large not a publishing platform, and more the sort of digital humanities centers, digital scholarship centers, library publishing activities that are sort of a very a quick growth. I mean, we don't do things quickly in the academy usually. This has been relatively quickly. So something to think about there.
Great. So I'm going to take one more question and then everybody go to lunch. Michael?
Question for Matt at CDL. So the thing about subscriptions is they spread the cost around a lot of different types of institutions, including those that don't publish a lot, like community colleges and liberal arts colleges and so forth. And an open access model or transformative agreement shifts all the costs to research intensive universities like University of California, which is all well and good, except I heard you use the term budget neutral. So how's that going to work?
Yeah, so there's certainly a long answer to this question and a short answer to this question.
I think we need to stick with the short.
I'm going to shoot for the short answer to the question. So we at the UC, I mean, we put out the Pay It Forward report, which fairly strongly implied that cost of publishing at our institutions and institutions like ours, large, high output institutions, may go up in an APC model. So part of the idea of bringing grant funding into the funding flows is to help offset that for the library in particular, with the idea that then the library can repurpose some of those offset funds to help support native open access publishers and other initiatives. Right. The other piece for the cost neutrality within a particular agreement, the idea there, and this kind of stems from a statement that was made at the Berlin 14 meeting, which I think was last December or October, of starting at a point of cost neutrality, using that to sort of figure out how the world will work, and then sort of letting the market develop as it may. And as our investments follow our researchers' publishing habits, those costs may increase with some publishers, they may decrease with some publishers, but really using that space of cost neutrality to get to a point that we can then, I think I used the metaphor of taking the training wheels off, right? Then we can sort of let it sort of evolve as it's going to. But without that safety blanket, I don't think we can even really get there, because both the institution and the publishers are worried about the finances in such a model.
Well, thank you all very much for the great questions. Enjoy your lunch and enjoy the rest of the meeting.